Hello, and welcome. I'm April, the Nerdy Witch, and we are on a witchful journey. You guys, I cannot tell you how excited I am to be talking about today's episode. I really just want to jump right in, but first, let's do a card reading for the week ahead. And I want to take a moment to remind everyone that these are collective readings. They're intended to reach those who need a particular message. So if it doesn't resonate or doesn't seem like it applies to you, that's fine. Every card reading that I do here on the podcast is a collective reading, unless I state otherwise. Okay, so today's card is coming from the Star Codes Astro Oracle deck. Today's card is Taurus, Cultivate. Is it just me, or does it seem like the card that we end up with seems to go with the episode somehow? I feel like this has happened at least a few times at this point. Anyway, Taurus, Cultivate. This card is about working with the metaphor of gardening, and that's actually written in the little guidebook that comes with this deck. I didn't make that up just so it would tie in with our topic. So, taking that metaphor of gardening and applying it to your life, relationships, projects, jobs, whatever, you're being asked to dig in, grow some roots, and grow stronger over time. Taurus is reliable, stable, grounded, patient, and devoted. Tapping into those traits will be highly beneficial for your endeavors because you want them to stand the test of time. Within the gardening metaphor, prepare your field, plant, and continue to tend the field and allow your crops to grow. Yes, Taurus is the bull, and some of the weaknesses of Taurus are possessiveness, stubbornness, and the potential to be uncompromising when things need to be changed from what the original plan was. But Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is where a lot of the tender nature comes from. Now, there's a possibility here that maybe something is being misinterpreted, like stubbornness being mistaken for strength, or reliability, or devotion. Or maybe it's the other way around. Get some clarity on this, and start cultivating your field. Just remember, these things take time. And since we're already on the topic of gardening, let's dig into planting a witch's garden. So, I guess, what is a witch's garden? A witch's garden is a garden that you create with the intention to cultivate a deeper connection to nature. You don't necessarily have to consider yourself to be a kitchen witch, or a green witch, or a hedge witch, or whatever other labels are used in order to create a witch's garden. Personally, I feel like everyone should do at least a little gardening. The main thing when it comes to a witch's garden, in my opinion, is that it's created with intention. Not just the intention of fostering a deeper bond with nature and the land around you and the seasons, but I feel like there should be intention in what you decide to plant. Are you going for a certain vibe? Are you going for medicinal herbs? Are you going for, it's pretty and it smells nice? Is your intention to support your local pollinator population? Is your intention about growing your own food for yourself and your family? Are the plants only going to be used in spell work? All of that stuff is what I recommend considering before you start on your garden. Now, I know a lot of people don't have the acreage to be able to create their ideal witch's garden. Honestly, we don't either. If I were going for my ideal dream witch's garden, it would take up the entire backyard, and we would need at least another 3 acres or so, and some more sunny areas. There would be a few stone paths winding through it. There would be a sundial some rain drums, an arbor bench, archways with climbing plants, and we would have blueberry and raspberry bushes, and an elderberry shrub. We would have veggies and flowers and herbs all over the place, and still have room for a little brick oven and grill, a garden shed, a little greenhouse, and a compost system. That's my dream for how I want our backyard to look. My reality is that we're on almost half an acre. Most of our backyard is currently overrun by mint and curly dock, and has been for a long number of years, I think. And it's going to require a lot of work. There used to be garden and flower beds where a lot of that stuff is, but it's now overgrown and the invasive plants have taken over. We've been working on getting the mint and curly dock under control for a while now, but I'm going to need to step up my game at this point. What we do currently have is a couple of raised beds. When we started our gardening journey a couple of years ago, we didn't dare go for more than 2 raised beds because I had never actually created, planted, and maintained a garden before. And I didn't think that I had enough of a green thumb. The only plants that I was able to keep alive previously were a cactus and a spider plant. I did try doing some pepper plant starts, but we lost power for over a day and I wasn't able to keep them warm enough to survive. But I really wanted a garden. So we made 2 raised beds and put some fencing around them because we've had a woodchuck family living nearby for the last few years. And I did some research on growing zones, planting times, easy to grow plants, companion planting, soil types, and fertilizer types. Our garden exploded. We had more cucumbers and cherry tomatoes than we really knew what to do with. I was making refrigerator pickles almost every week. And the only real pest that we had was hornworms. The only thing that didn't do well in our garden was carrots. And looking back, I think I know why. Last year, our garden barely produced anything, and I guarantee it was because I didn't want to drive the extra 15 minutes to get the compost soil that we'd used the previous year. And I ended up going with something closer to home, and when I got home, I noticed that it was more wood chips than rich compost. And it didn't help that last summer we had a pretty long drought, and I got planting a little later than I really wanted to. We did end up with some green beans and zucchini, and enough lemon basil to put on our homemade pizzas and in the ratatouille dish that I made, but everything else was pretty sad looking. The last 2 years have taught me a lot. And needless to say, I absolutely do not consider myself to be like some gardening guru or anything like that. And that's not why we're here today. We're here today because I want to share what I do know about gardening so far, our plans for our garden this year, and how you can take what I've learned and put your own little twist on it for your own witch's garden. I should also leave a little disclaimer in here. Always check with your primary care physician to make sure you're good to be outside doing an activity like gardening. It can be pretty hard on the body if you have certain medical diagnoses. You may need to make adjustments on how you garden, depending on your health, and your doctor may be able to come up with some ideas that might suit you. Also, make sure to do your research on the plants that you'll be using in your garden. Some places don't allow certain plants for various reasons, so it may be a good idea to check with your local agricultural department, maybe? Just to make sure that you aren't planting anything that would harm the local ecosystem. And if you are planning to plant and work with some of the more toxic plants, please, 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 make sure to keep them separate from any edible plants that you're planting and make sure to label them properly. If you have children or pets that might get into them, maybe just skip the toxic plants unless you're able to really block them off in a safe, child and pet-proof way. And lastly, the information provided here is for informational purposes only, and not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Okay, let's talk about a few terms that you may or may not have questions about. Growing zones, otherwise known as planting zones or hardiness zones. This is really important to know if you're going to be growing outdoors. These zones help you to determine what will grow pretty well in your region. It's pretty easy to look up online. If you're in the US, check out the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone Map. You can even search your zone using your zip code. Zones range from 1A, which can be found in parts of Alaska, to 13B, which can be found in parts of Puerto Rico. It's based on the average lowest winter temperatures that each zone gets. If you live anywhere else, check how your growing zones are divided up for you, as they're likely to be different from how they're divided up here in the US. Europe, for example, doesn't have a wide range of temperatures on their zone map because the climate tends to be milder. My growing zone here is a B4 pocket because we're close to a river that makes the temperatures drop a little bit. If we were outside of that pocket around the river, we'd be in a zone 5A, which is a tad bit warmer. So in looking for things to grow in the garden, I look for plants that are going to be happy in a 4B zone. Unfortunately, we don't have a greenhouse. If we did, there'd be a little bit of wiggle room to explore a wider variety of plants. And then we have companion planting. This is intentional planting to help your garden grow. Each plant has a handful of plants that they don't like to have as roommates, and they also have a list of plants that they love being around. Some companion planting has to do with what each plant needs for nutrients and pairing them in a way that doesn't have you constantly fertilizing. Some companion planting has to do with root depth. You don't want too many plants fighting for space in the deep soil, or have all of them stay right up near the top layers and fighting for space there either. And some companion planting has to do with pest deterrent. Prime example. The first year that we had our garden, I really wanted to know about companion planting because I wanted to completely avoid the use of pesticides. We had received a couple of tomato plant nursery starts, and I was concerned that we'd have trouble with pests between the cherry tomatoes, the heirloom tomatoes, the cucumbers, and the peas. So I ended up getting some marigold and planted like 3 or 4 of them next to the tomatoes. We barely had any trouble with pests that entire summer. Literally just the hornworms, which I knew I'd probably see at some point, so I was already keeping a close eye out because I knew that they can decimate your tomato plants if you don't stay on top of it. And then we have starts, otherwise known as seedlings. These are the little plants that you can get from a garden center, or if you're lucky, you have a gardener friend that ended up with too many starts. If you live in a fairly cold place, like me, a lot of your garden will need to be started indoors before you can transplant them outdoors. They're great for beginners because you're starting out with a plant that already has established roots, rather than navigating the technical stuff when it comes to starting from seed. I primarily started from seed the last 2 years. The only exceptions were the 2 tomato plants that we had and 1 green bean plant. I did find that sometimes with tomato starts, you can end up with something called pith necrosis, which is basically a rotting of the stalk and stems, and sometimes the fruit of the tomato from the inside. And this can happen with store-bought starts, because they can sometimes use too much nitrogen in the fertilizer, and especially if they're grown in a greenhouse setting, that bacteria or fungus or whatever it is can make the plant rot from the inside out. So starts can be a little tricky to do yourself if you don't have the patience, or if you don't have the right environment for the seeds to sprout. But I do encourage experimenting with getting things to grow from seed. So now that we know the why, or the intention, behind creating your witch's garden, and we know a little bit of the lingo, now it's time to figure out where your garden will be and what you're going to put in it. What you'll want to do is really figure out what plants you want in your garden, and maybe accept that there might be some that you won't be able to grow without a lot of work. The plants you pick will likely determine where you put things. If you have a lot of plants that require full sun, which is 6 or more hours of sunlight per day, then you'll want to make sure that you place those plants where they're going to get a lot of light. Soil type and water saturation also play a part here, which is why we have raised beds at our house. A lot of what's in the ground around our home is clay. We also have a mysterious spring box type situation on our property, which was filled in with dirt at some point, but water still continues to come out of it. So everything in our yard below that box gets pretty soggy, which is another reason we went with the raised beds. We put the raised beds downhill from the spring box in an effort to use some of that water for a purpose without spending the money to create an irrigation system. Before putting in the raised beds, our driveway would always turn into mud in the area that's downhill from the spring box. And the last 2 years with the garden there, it's been less muddy. It also makes it so that our plants get watered from below, even if we totally miss a day of watering with the garden hose. Now, for our own garden, I pawed through all of the seeds that we have, and I spent the equivalent of an entire day planning out what we'd plant, where they'd be placed, and so on. And I wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of everything that I could fit into the 2 beds that we currently have. And yes, we'll likely be enlarging the garden next year. This year, we'll have broccoli, scallions, rosemary, chamomile, calendula, sage, cucumber, French marigold, radishes, chives, and oregano. And all of those will make their way into the raised beds. Maybe not the radishes, though. It all depends on if we ultimately decide to actually use them for food or if the goal is to let them go to flower so that they can help protect the cucumbers. I haven't decided yet. We also plan on having a tall double shepherd's hook where we'll hang strawberry plants that I bought on a whim. Hopefully it works. I've never grown strawberries intentionally and never in a pot, so this is absolutely an experiment, and the path that my brain took to get us here is a little funny. I love strawberries. I love them even more the fresher they are. And I was recently watching a video by Hearthwitch on YouTube, and she had posted it a couple of years ago at this point. But she was talking about how she'd gone to the garden center and ended up buying a bunch of strawberry starts that she was going to grow in a hanging pot. And I've been thinking about growing our own strawberries for a couple of years, but my biggest concern was that they'd get eaten by wildlife. Watching her video, I was like, oh my god, why didn't I think of growing strawberries in a hanging pot? That's an excellent idea. And it takes care of my concern of wildlife, because then we could put the hanging pots inside the fenced-in area and keep them safe from the woodchuck and the deer and whatever else might nibble on them. But I wasn't planning on growing any strawberries this year because I had already planned out what was going in the garden, and I didn't want to overwhelm myself between tending the garden and trying to eradicate the apple mint and curly dock. Well, I went out the other day, and as soon as I walked in the door of one of the shops that I went into, I was face to face with a bunch of bare root strawberry plants. And that's why I came home with 7 of them. And then we also have a whole packet of sunflower seeds that were given to us by our local Rotary Club that we'll be planting as well. And I was given some Japanese blue hosta seeds that came from a coworker. Shout out to you, Jackie. Hopefully I can get these little beauties growing. I've tended to hostas before, but I've never grown them from seed, so we'll see how this goes. The majority of the plants that we plan on planting this year are full sun plants. I think the only one that likes shade is the hosta, which is totally fine because we have more usable sunny spots for gardening right now than we do usable shady spots. Another thing that you may have already started forming in your mind is how you want your garden layout or shape to look. Many witches go for the popular spiral garden, many go for the crescent-shaped beds, and some create a pentagram shape with stones and plant according to the points of the pentagram. Same for pentacle-shaped beds, and some go for the more chaotic, wild look. This isn't something that you have to pay special attention to, it's just something to consider while the garden plans are still in the making. And I think this is a good time to talk about a garden journal. It was something that we decided to start doing toward the end of the first growing season, because we wanted to be able to keep track of what we planted and where, what we used, what seemed to work, what didn't seem to work, the last frost date, and the first fall frost. Garden journals are amazing for sketching out how you want your garden to look and anything you feel would be beneficial information for you to know in the future. I'll post a couple pictures of what ours looks like, but we have little sketches of each raised bed, plant location, number of plants we'll be expecting to have, notes for when we should begin our starts indoors, how many days it should take to germinate, and in the previous year's notes we wrote down the date that things started actually germinating and showing little sprouts, how many we actually ended up with, what soil or compost we used, what fertilizer we used and the dates that we used it, general weather notes, and some key notes that we'd want to remember going into the next growing season. We also kept track of any time that we harvested from the plants and the amount that we harvested. It not only makes you slow down to observe what's going on in your garden and around you, but also makes you pay attention to the changes in nature throughout the spring, summer, and fall, which is a big part of having a witch's garden. Learning and living by, as best we can, the natural ebb and flow of the seasons, life, and nature, and creating a deeper connection to nature in the process. So, some witchy plants that you can put in your garden. Obviously, rosemary. In the craft, it can be used as a substitute for any herb in a spell, but is often used for cleansing and purifying if you turn it into an incense. It can also be used in a cleansing bundle for protection, aiding in mental clarity, and clearing negativity from a space. It has a piney scent and flavor, and is a wonderful addition to meals as well, especially on roasted meats and veggies and in soups and breads. There are a number of other benefits as well. And then we have calendula, known in the world of the craft as a flower that attracts abundance, prosperity, luck, and success. Infuse your bath water with this flower to boost your charisma. It's a great pollinator attractor, especially if you're hoping for bees and butterflies. The flower can also be used in healing salves and in lotions for treating things like eczema. It's also used in anti-aging creams, thanks to its ability to stimulate collagen production and skin cell regeneration. Yarrow, this wonderful little plant, is known for its association with love, divination, healing, protection, and balance. It aids in enhancing psychic abilities and spirit communication. It can be used in a dream pillow or used to dress a candle in love spells. It's great as a tea when dealing with fever and to help move nasal mucus and prevent sinus infections. It also works wonders as a first aid poultice for slow bleeding wounds. And then we have sage, of course. We're all pretty familiar with sage, right? Though there are a number of different types of sage, I'll be planting Salvia officinalis, or common garden sage. It's what came in a packet of medicinal herb seeds that I had purchased previously. In herbalism, it can be used in a tea to soothe sore throats and relieve stress. It can be turned into a gargle for gum health. In the craft, it can be used to banish negative energy, cleanse, purify, heal, and aid in spiritual health. It can be used in a smoke cleansing bundle or an incense. Use the dried herb in a spiritual cleansing bath spell. You can grind dried sage and eggshells together and use the powder to create protective barriers. This particular sage is great to use in recipes in the kitchen as well. One of the reasons why I love this one so much. It's very versatile. Then we have mugwort, the increasingly common herb found in a number of witches' cabinets. It's often used for enhancing dreams, establishing contact with other spiritual realms, enhancing intuition, banishing negative energy, and protecting against harmful influences. From an herbalist stance, it can also be used to help regulate menstrual cycles, support appetite and digestion, and can help soothe itching and burning from skin issues. It's also a great alternative to using mothballs to protect clothing, and it can be used as a spice in the kitchen. We have mint, which has many uses. It's known for its invigorating properties and is associated with clarity, renewal, energetic freshness, mental focus, and emotional uplift. Mint is also connected to a lot of wealth and abundance and prosperity spells. Herbally, it can be used to help ease stomach upset and motion sickness, ease congestion, and relieve pain and inflammation. Side note on the mint though, don't plant it directly into the garden. Always, always, always keep it in a pot, otherwise your backyard will end up looking like mine, with lots of mint everywhere. Then we have lavender. There's a wide range of associations for lavender: clarity, vision, love, protection, romance, calming, beauty, joy. It boosts both mood and memory, attraction, happiness, longevity, sleep, and healing. You can use it in sachets, tea, and even baked goods. And I have a recipe for honey lavender shortbread cookies that are delicious. There are a bunch of other witchy plants that would go well in a witch's garden, but if I were to list them all, we'd be here all day long. The main thing is to make sure that you're going with plants that you have a personal connection to, or would like to create a connection to. Some useful tools for the actual gardening part. And I'm putting this in here because the first year that we had our garden, we kind of flew by the seat of our pants because we didn't want to buy a bunch of stuff. And then we ended up caving and buying some stuff. So, watering can. Indoors, you can probably get away with puncturing the cap of a disposable water bottle and just use that. But if your garden is outdoors, I do recommend a watering can. We do use our garden hose a lot, but sometimes it's necessary to use the watering can, especially when it's time to fertilize the soil again. You can put the fertilizer right into the water and mix it before putting it in the garden. And it allows you to get up close to your plants while you're watering. You can't really establish a deeper connection with nature if you have an automatic watering system. A trowel, because sometimes you just need one. Gardening gloves. Now, I do go back and forth with the gloves. Sometimes I work barehanded. Other times I use gloves. It's a personal preference thing. I work with my hands all the time, which means that I tend to get cuts, scrapes, bruises, as well as junk under my nails, even though I keep them short. Sometimes I don't want to have to scrub my hands forever to get them clean, especially if I'm going from weeding the garden to baking some bread. And a wheelbarrow. If you have the space for a wheelbarrow, get one. We have a heavy-duty Gorilla Cart wheelbarrow that has a folding handle, and it can be stored against the wall in the shed, and I don't know what I would do without that thing. I use it for weeding, mixing soil and compost, hauling supplies from one end of the yard to the other, and I've even used it for carting some moving boxes down the road before. That thing gets used all summer long. You can also look into gardening by the phases of the moon. It's an ancient technique that, I'll be honest, I haven't learned much about yet, other than you're supposed to plant your garlic on the new moon in October for better root development by winter. The Farmer's Almanac has some good info on gardening by the moon, if that's something you're interested in learning more about. So, if you're in an area like me, a 4B growing zone or similar, then you're probably thinking it'll be best to start some of your plants indoors. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you want to do it the way that I did it for the last 2 years and just plant directly after the frost. You do you, but I do want to talk about starting your plants indoors for those who plan on doing that. So like I said earlier, our garden journal has a breakdown of when we'll likely need to start our seedlings. I have pics posted in my socials if you want to see how that's written out. I have one day almost every week from mid-March until a couple of weeks before planting time where I'll be starting more seedlings. I'm a little hesitant because some of them do have to be started pretty early, but they aren't pepper plants, thankfully. And the last frost sometimes doesn't happen until nearly the end of May, where we are. Starting your seeds doesn't really mean that you have to have some expensive setup, but you will need good soil, containers to start them in, a cover to keep the humidity in the containers, a warm place to store them, and they'll need lots of sunlight or a grow lamp. Some people like to use those little start cells made out of the flimsy plastic, but I find that I don't have much luck with those. I have a number of biodegradable containers that I'll be using, and some smaller reusable starter cells as backups if I need it. You can use almost anything to start your seeds in. Paper towel rolls that are cut into 3 or 4 smaller rolls, toilet paper rolls, paper egg cartons, single-serving yogurt cups, It doesn't have to cost you a fortune. The main things to remember are to keep your soil moist and leave the cover on until your seeds sprout. Your cover can be either a sheet of plastic wrap kept tight over a larger container, or it can be an actual dome cover, like the starter kits usually have. Follow the instructions for planting your seeds, or if you don't have any, it's pretty easy to look up online and write it down for future reference. Your warm spot can be in a window that allows for sun and warmth, or you can use a heat mat if needed. You can also keep your seedlings near your home's heat source, but not too close because you don't want to cook them, and you may have to check them more frequently to make sure that they aren't drying out. But either way, make sure they get enough sunlight if you don't have a grow lamp. I have a feeling we're going to have to get creative with that at our house because we do have 3 kittens who love to spend time in the windows, and they can be very clumsy, and they love to get into everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Now, when it comes to the garden itself, if you're planting outside, don't do anything with your brush or last year's growth or anything like that until temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees Fahrenheit for at least a week. A lot of pollinators use dead leaves and hollowed out bits of brush as their winter habitat, and we don't want to harm them. A good indicator from nature that they're finally active is when you start seeing dandelions blooming. Then you know for sure that it's safe to get started in the garden. And I like to treat this part as a ritual. Clear away debris and weeds, add compost or well-rotted organic material, draw a rune, specifically Yibo, which is the one that's shaped like an X, in the soil. It represents the exchange of energy, the unification of forces for mutual benefit, working in harmony. It's about the blessings that come from giving and receiving. In the case of the garden, you're acknowledging that you have a give and receive relationship with nature. You're making it known that you're creating this space to give to nature, well-fertilized soil, a place for pollinators to stop by, shade and whatnot for bugs, etc. And while you don't expect to get anything in return, you're kind of putting forth a request by way of the rune and your actions that nature will also give when the time is right. And then plant or transplant your garden. Make sure you're keeping the thought of Yibo in mind and the giving and receiving relationship that you wish to have with nature in this spot. Let's talk about garden protections. We want to keep the garden protected in all the ways, right? Especially if you have fruits or veggies that you're growing. So let's start with the mundane and work our way to the magical. Fencing. This is particularly important if you need to keep animals out. Like I said, we have a woodchuck family that's been living near us, or maybe under our shed. I'm not totally sure. And while I'm fine with them eating the overgrown flora in the yard, I had a funny feeling that we needed to put up fencing to keep them out of the garden. And with woodchucks, you generally have to dig the fencing into the ground about a foot to keep them from going under it. It also kind of deters the deer. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely don't mind them stopping by to nibble on things in the yard. I'm perfectly happy to have plants that they will nibble, but that area of the garden is off limits. Hair on the garden fence. Has anyone ever heard of or tried this? You're supposed to take human hair and put it in some cheesecloth or a nylon stocking or something breathable like that, and tie it to the garden fence. It's supposed to work best when placed around the perimeter of the garden, and it has to be replaced every few weeks as the human scent fades. It's supposed to deter all kinds of animals that would normally get into your garden otherwise. I personally haven't tried this officially, but I have definitely tied shedded strands to the fence before. Like, I'm working in the garden and a shedded hair is tickling my arm, so I grab it and tie it to the fence. You can place crystals in the garden. Clear quartz to amplify energy, vitality, and plant health. Rose quartz is ideal for any plants that are struggling. It helps encourage love and healing in the plants. Citrine draws in the solar energy of the sun, and it's great for sun-loving plants. Tree agate to enhance the connection to the earth, encourage abundance, and create a harmonious environment. Crystals can be placed along garden paths, next to certain plants if it's more of a focused intention, like helping the struggling plants. You can put them in a crystal grid, or you can just have them scattered around overall for protection and encouragement. You can use that ground sage and ground eggshell combo that I mentioned earlier to sprinkle around the garden to create a protective barrier. You can plant some extra protective herbs, rosemary, thyme, oregano, basil, all around the garden to not just magically protect, but also help repel fungus that can kill your garden. You can create a ritual scarecrow to place in your garden. Just use whatever old materials that you have. Make sure that they're something that you can burn without being toxic, because this ritual scarecrow gets burned on Samhain. On the night before Beltane, or Beltana, which is on the eve of May, stand in the center of your garden and face each of the 4 directions and declare, "This garden is protected." You can leave something for the land spirits, like a fairy house, a toadstool, or some shiny trinkets, and let them know that you're leaving these for them in hopes that they'll help protect the garden. Or you can place a hagstone near the entrance to your garden, preferably hanging from the fence or on a nearby tree. It's said that the hagstone allows only good to pass through, so if it's hung by that garden gate, it'll help keep negative things out and allow for growth, abundance, luck, and protection of your garden. Some people like to decorate their gardens. This can be done with the use of statues, lanterns, fairy lights, chimes, rain drums, whatever you feel will lift the energy of your garden. And lastly, a few little daily rituals to do around your garden. I cannot tell you how much I have loved walking out to the garden every morning, coffee in hand, to admire the garden, pull any little weeds or grass that were coming up, check for damage, disease, pests, and check progress and if anything could be harvested. I would spend anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour out there every morning, and it's a great form of moving meditation. And it also allowed me to determine if I needed to water the garden as well. You can also take a few minutes each day to go out and just spend time in the garden, even if you're just sitting there, playing a little bit of music or talking or singing to them. But you can also spend time meditating or writing in a journal. And you can also go out in the evening before dark and check again. And this is a great time to make mental notes about any deadheading that will need to happen, topping off mulch, or if any plants need supporting. Regardless of how you do your witch's garden, it's about working in harmony with nature, bringing life force energy to the area around your home. Tending your garden is everyday magic in its rawest form. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss out on future episodes, hit those like and follow buttons. Next time, we'll be diving into what it means to celebrate Ostara. I can't wait to share it with you. In the meantime, you can find me on Facebook, Witchful Journey Podcast, on Instagram at _witchful_journey, on BlueSky at awitchfuljourney.bsky.social, and on YouTube, A Witchful Journey. I enjoy hearing from listeners, so if you pop in, say hi, leave me a rating or a review. If you feel called to contribute, donate, or buy my next podcast coffee, whatever you want to call it, check out A Witchful Journey on Ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. You can also send stories or experiences to awitchfuljourney@gmail.com. I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey.